Ever watch a science fiction flick or maybe read a novel set way out in the future and you get that weird feeling like, hang on, I've heard this story before.
Oh, absolutely. Like maybe a creation story, but there's a spaceship involved.
Yeah, or, some kind of savior figure, but they arrive in a rocket ship instead of, well, the usual way.
Right.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit because today's deep dive, it really takes us right into that overlap, that place where sci-fi bumps up against some really foundational stories.
And it's got a name, actually, this kind of thing. Or, well, a name coined by Brian Aldiss anyway. He called it the Shaggy God Story.
Shaggy God Story, okay.
Yeah, and the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction has a good definition. Basically, a science fiction story that's like a crudely rationalized biblical myth.
Crudely rationalized. I like that.
It connects to the idea of a shaggy dog story,
Yeah.
that long tail that builds and builds.
And then has a kind of silly or surprising punchline at the end.
Exactly. But here, instead of a joke about a dog, the reveal sort of casts a new light, a sci-fi light, on an old biblical tale.
Right. And that crudely rationalized part feels key. Like a classic example you sometimes see.
Oh, like the scientists sending life forms to some empty planet?
Yeah, exactly. Experimental life forms, maybe. And then the big twist, the punchline, is that they're actually Adam and Eve.
Right. The new Adam and Eve.
And that's where things get really interesting for our discussion today, because we're going to dive into a really great example of this exact trope from the original Twilight Zone.
We are. We're looking at Probe 7 over and out. It was from the show's 5th season, the final one.
Okay.
And actually, if you're a fan, or if this sounds intriguing, it's airing this weekend. Part of a SYFY marathon.
Oh, good timing then. So, okay, we've got this idea, the Shaggy God story. Let's get into this Twilight Zone episode. Set the scene for us. What's the setup?
So it centers on Colonel Cook. Richard Basehart plays him. He's an astronaut, and he's crash-landed, stranded on an unknown planet.
Unknown, but habitable.
Habitable. Crucially, yes. But his home planet, well, it's facing imminent thermonuclear destruction.
Oof.
And his ship is totaled, damaged beyond repair. So you got this picture of him, possibly the last survivor of his civilization, alone.
Wow. Talk about a fresh start, but under the worst possible circumstances. He's not alone for long, though, is he?
No, not for long.
Yeah.
Pretty soon after landing, he bumps into someone else, another stranded traveler, a woman named Norda.
Norda. Okay. Played by Antoinette Bauer.
That's right. And immediately, there's a problem. They don't speak the same language.
Ah, the classic language barrier. Adds tension right away.
Definitely. And Norda, well, she's pretty wary of him. Understandably.
Makes sense. Two strangers, maybe from warring worlds for all they know, suddenly stuck together, but they decide to team up eventually. What changes?
Well, despite that initial, fear and suspicion, they both figure out pretty quickly that their chances of surviving are much, much better together.
Safety in numbers, even if it's just two.
Right. So they start heading towards this area Cook saw near his crash site. He described it as lush, garden-like.
Garden-like. Okay, the echoes are starting already, aren't they?
They really are. It plants that seed, you could say. And then come the twists, the big reveals at the end that just reframe everything.
Okay, lay them on us. What happens?
So in the last few minutes, it all comes out.
Yeah.
First, through Norda's language, we find out the name of this planet they're on.
Which is Earth.
Whoa, okay. That's a big one right there.
Well,
but I feel like there's more.
Oh, yeah. Colonel Cook. He then tells Norda his first name.
Let me guess.
He tells her it's Adam.
Adam, of course.
And then she tells him her name.
Eve.
Eve. So boom. In that perfect Shaggy God Story way, the sci-fi setup melts away and you realize you've been watching a retelling.
Of Genesis.
Yeah. And it works because, we all have this baseline understanding of those creation stories. And this just flips it, grounds it in this pseudo-scientific context, makes you think about those old stories differently. You can practically hear the Twilight Zone theme kicking in right there. So this new Adam and Eve, how does their interaction go? Do we get like a snake forbidden fruit?
Well, this is where it gets interesting because the episode plays with those elements but also kind of subverts them. There's this key scene, right? Norda picks an apple from a tree.
Ah, the apple. Very deliberate.
Very deliberate visual cue, yeah. And she offers it to Cook. But it's presented totally differently. It's like an act of sharing. A connection forming between them as they face this new world.
So no temptation, no dire warnings from above.
No sense of temptation, no serpent whispering, and definitely no immediate divine punishment for taking a bite.
Huh. That's a really significant change from the original, so no consequences this time.
Well, not in that direct traditional sense,
yeah.
But the episode serves up a different kind of irony. Maybe a sadder one, even. Because even though they have this clean slate, right, this perfect, pristine world, untouched by whatever destroyed Cook's home, the feeling you're left with is that their descendants, well, they're probably doomed to repeat the same mistakes.
So the self-destructive patterns that led to the first apocalypse.
They're still there, latent, ready to emerge again, even in paradise.
That's pretty bleak, a very Twilight Zone kind of bleakness. It really touches on that idea of original sin, doesn't it?
It does, directly, but reframed for sci-fi. It's less about disobeying God, maybe, and more about, is there some inherent flaw, some tendency towards conflict, towards self-destruction that we just can't shake?
Regardless of the setting, a new Eden doesn't necessarily fix the fundamental problem.
Exactly. It poses that question, can we ever really escape our nature, whatever that nature is?
So wrapping this up then, Probe 7, Over and Out, is just this fantastic example of a Shaggy God story.
Right.
It takes that foundational biblical narrative.
Adam and Eve, the garden.
Right. And just cleverly reworks it through this science fiction lens, hitting you with that classic Twilight Zone twist that makes you think.
Absolutely, and it really makes you wonder about why these archetypal stories have such staying power, you know?
Yeah. Why do we keep retelling them? In different genres, different settings?
What is it about these stories? Creation, new beginnings, but always with that shadow, that potential to mess it all up again. Why does that still resonate so deeply, even with astronauts named Adam and Eve on a planet called Earth?
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Does a fresh start ever really mean a truly different ending? Or are some patterns just part of the deal, something for you to chew on?